Here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts. Ever wonder what bridges the gap between your favorite film genres, subgenres, and movements? CinemaScope is here to explore these connections, taking you on a thrilling odyssey through the ever-evolving art of cinema. I'm your host, Andy Nelson, and in each episode, we embark on a deep dive into the forces that sculpt the world of film. From the styles you know and love, like heist films or the French New Wave, to the ones you may not be as familiar with, like Turkish Yeşilçam or Brazilian Nordwesterns, my expert guests and I unravel the complex tapestry of storytelling, style, and innovation that defines the world of film as we unpack the myriad catalysts of change that shape these diverse styles. Whether you're a student of film, a creative professional, or simply a devoted movie enthusiast, CinemaScope is your gateway to a richer, more immersive film experience. Don't just watch movies, understand them, appreciate them, and revel in their artistry with CinemaScope. Subscribe today.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today, myself, Matthew, I'm joined by my co-host Riki Hayashi as we talk about the movie The Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, but even more, a larger discussion of this entire Planet of the Apes franchise and the fascinating questions that it brings up about culture, society, religion, language, and the extent to which, if humans were to be wiped out on this planet and a new species of simians, of even more sentient apes were to take over, what would we learn from an anthropological standpoint? What would we learn is distinct to humanity, and what would be perhaps replicated? And what does that say about humanity or about society in general, or any of these kind of things? It's a very broad topic. If you haven't seen Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, don't worry. Neither has Riki Hayashi, my co-host. We're trying something a little bit new today. Once Riki became co-host, he and I had bounced around a lot of ideas about where we wanted this podcast to go. One thing Riki had really been strong on was the idea of moving away from kind of more movie review style things into, like, let's really talk about the issues here. And one of the natural ideas that would go to is, could we do an episode where only one of us had seen the movie in question, or the series or the book or whatever, because the point wasn't to discuss it specifically, but to discuss the larger issues involved. So I'm going to walk through some ideas from the plot of this movie, but we're largely been talking about kind of the larger themes and the larger issues that it raises. So, Riki, let me say hello and let you introduce yourself. And why don't you start by saying, kind of like, before we talked about it, what was your kind of knowledge base of the Planet of the Apes movies?
Hey, konnichiwa, minasan. Good day to you all. Yeah, obviously I'm familiar with the franchise. I think I've seen all of the original movies at one point or another. It's been a while though. And then I watched the Tim Burton one, disappointing, very
Fair.
weird. And I believe I watched like the first two in this reboot series.
Mm-hmm.
And more than anything, like, I'm struck by how, like, this franchise exists at
Yeah.
all. That it is a franchise. The original Planet of the Apes came out in 1968. Think about that. Like, this very well could be the first movie franchise, or at least like sci-fi movie franchise. You can make an argument obviously for the Godzilla franchise in Japan, but for like a Western movie franchise, I guess James Bond would also be like started in the 60s. But this is like all before, now we have the MCU. Star Wars is becoming its own massive thing.
Right.
Star Trek. Planet of the Apes was there, like, doing it first.
It really was. And even the James Bond movies that you mention, I think of that more as a series than a franchise, or it is a franchise, but it's not really a series, in that most of them reboot the series, particularly with each new James Bond we get, in part because, since he was a man in his 30s and 40s and the 60s, like, you kind of have to. But also, they just keep reinventing the character, whereas this is, because it's not the story of any one character, it's the story of literally evolution over a period of thousands of years. yeah, there's a way in which you can see all these stories as fitting together. And I think I at some point want to have someone on who really is has a background knowledge of horror movies, especially from this period, because
That's
my
me.
oh well
Well,
even
maybe this. I mean, horror movies in the '60s, not quite so much. I guess that would be like Alfred Hitchcock.
yeah, I mean, part of what I was thinking, maybe it's more the 50s, but is that like things like Invasion of the Body
Oh,
Snatchers
sure.
and like a lot of the stuff that like maybe people went to see in drive-throughs and stuff like that. Maybe that's more 50s, but going into 60s and 70s,
Okay, yeah. Like
you did often have
the giant ants.
yeah, that you would often have like part 2, part 3, part 4, etc. So I think Planet of the Apes was not incredibly like unique in that regard. President Bartlett's now yelling at me because something's either unique or not. Um, but more importantly, the fact that it's now been rebooted and that they've never actually specifically said so. It started, it seemed like a reboot, but the more you pay attention, the more you're seeing all these connections. And especially in these most recent movies, it really is feeling like what it is the prequel to it. Because, and here to give people some background, those original movies, and Riki can speak more to them, I've seen all of them as well, but a while ago, those original movies start when the spaceship called the Icarus, piloted by Charlton Heston, in a really wonderful depiction of like 1960s ideas of what future spaceflight would be like. It's kind of wonderful and kind of ridiculous. Crash lands on this strange planet, and they have all these adventures on this planet that is ruled by apes. And they're kind of surprised because the apes speak English and like do things that seem very similar to human constructs in a lot of ways. And what he finally comes to discover at the end of that movie and learns through the future movies is that it is not a strange planet, that his ship went through a time wormhole of some kind. Back in the 60s, they didn't waste so much time explaining these things. They just waved their hands and said time wormhole.
As
And
you should.
as you should, I think it's much
Don't
better that
explain
way.
time travel. Never explain your time travel. Just do it.
100%. That it's actually Earth thousands and thousands of years later, and that some cataclysmic event happened, causing most of humanity to be wiped out, a very few humans to continue, but as like kind of a very primitive, like almost Cro-Magnon kind of level of the species, and that they're mostly hunched over. They cannot speak. They have sort of very basic understanding, and they're basically either pets or slaves or tools of the apes who rule civilization. And then, of course, there's lots of like social commentary in that perspective. Some of it fairly heavy-handed, some of it fairly subtle, and a lot of it very progressive for the 60s and 70s, and even for today, about racism, about culture, about policing, about all these great topics.
Which is
The-
ironic, given the man who stars in the movie.
yeah, Charlton Heston has become sort of, great grand poobah of the actors for Trump and all that kind of thing. So some humor there. Though there is certainly a lot of rah-rah United States in those movies. The most recent set of movies, which started with James Franco, and I think one of his best acting performances, opposite Andy Serkis in another phenomenal acting performance, is about a scientist who's doing experiments on monkeys and on apes. And you spend most of the movie trying to figure out, like, what does this have to do with the Planet of the Apes? Because this is very much about humanity. But what you come to understand, there's massive spoilers here, is that he is attempting to design a virus. No, he is attempting to design a treatment for Alzheimer's because his father has Alzheimer's, others have, and a lot of his experiments are on apes. And in so doing, he's managed to help apes achieve a much higher level of intelligence and become fully uh, uh, conversant with humans through sign language, including this one ape, Caesar. By the end of the movie, there's lots of corporate malfeasance, there's lots of shenanigans. The thing that he has designed has been taken by corporate and sort of supersized to the point that it can make all apes, apes are already sentient, so calling them sentient, I think, is incorrect, but raising their intelligence level and raising their communication level, leading to the next couple of movies, in which I think what we're seeing is the slow evolution of the Planet of the Apes that becomes in those Charlton Heston movies, because we eventually find out that the virus wipes out most of humanity, that it reduces the humans who are left into this sort of pre-verbal, pre-evolutionary state, and that the apes are becoming more and more in control. And those movies are all set during the time of Caesar's life. And then this movie is set many, many generations later, about 200, 300 years later. And it's about what has happened and how both human and ape societies have evolved. So we'll
Mhm.
get into all of that. But stepping back a bit, Riki, what do you think are some of the things you took away from those Planet of the Apes movies in terms of like what they had to say, or what you took from them, or what you disagreed with about the way these kind of societies would or would not evolve?
Well, to me, Planet of the Apes has always been about like contrast
Mm-hmm.
between the human characters and the ape characters. And in the original series from the 60s and 70s, right, the apes are already the dominant species on the planet, which turns out to be Earth, and they are the civilized ones. And the humans who are left are shown to be more animalistic. And then you
Mm-hmm.
drop Charlton Heston in as a human who comes, from a civilized time. So he sees what's going on, and he's confused, and frankly he's angry, right? Because the famous line, like, get your hands off me, you dirty apes, or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
paraphrasing. He's very much like in favor of his own species, humans, and yet comes to see like the point of view of some of the apes, I believe, and forms bonds with them, and realizes, like, he discovers that humans ruined the planet. Like,
Mm-hmm.
humanity was the one responsible for nuclear apocalypse and destroyed the planet, and apes after that became ascendant. They became the primary civilization. I believe in the second one, beneath the planet of the apes, he actually like also explodes a nuke, so that he becomes kind of
Mm-hmm.
the like he fulfills humanity's promise, kind of, in a way.
Yeah.
And then they also, the the apes themselves time travel and
Yeah.
go back, and it becomes a loop, maybe a time loop. So it's
Mm-hmm.
it's a it's a confusing franchise, because it was at a time when you didn't have like a Kevin Feige overseeing the entire process and saying, like, this is where we have to end up, like, these are
Right.
like, they just made movies because they were popular and made money. These came out 68, 70, 71, 72, 73, the original 5. So they were rushed out to make
Right.
money, and frankly, like, the latter 3 pretty much don't make sense because of that.
Mm-hmm.
The reboot franchise, we've had a lot more time. 2011,
Right.
14, 17, 24. Like, that's a big gap. So there's like much more intentionality to the reboot
Mm-hmm.
franchise, not just within itself, but also connecting to the old one, like you
Yeah.
said.
There's a lot
There
of Easter eggs. There's a lot of dropping of things.
In
Eh,
the very first one, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, the James Franco one, there's a scene where they're showing like a news story of Charlton Heston's spaceship taking off. And then
yeah.
I think there's like a newspaper story about like the astronauts are lost, like we've lost contact with the astronauts. And there's complete background. Like no
Yeah.
one, like, if you don't know to look for it, you don't see it. But once you see it, you're like, oh, okay. Like, is it just an Easter egg?
Yeah.
Or are we going to connect? And it seems like we are now, right? Like in this new one, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes.
There's a
Like,
number of ways. One, just in that, one of the plot points of this movie is that there's a scene in which both there's sort of an ape hero and an ape comes across a human. I'll tell more about that movie in a second, but I wanted to make this point. Both an ape and a human who they're working with look through this ancient telescope and see something that scares them quite dearly. And Noah, who's our ape protagonist, describes it as a hole that eats light. And
okay.
one of the theories is, it wasn't explicitly said, but one of the theories is that it wouldn't make sense for it to be the Icarus, but what they're seeing is the portal, the time portal, or whatever it is, the black hole, whatever it is that causes the Icarus to go through space at such a crazy rate, space
Yeah.
and time. A more concrete, though, connection that you can definitely see in the Charlton Heston movie, there's a attractive brunette character who is one of the echoes, the humans who can't speak, I believe played by Raquel Welch. And then that kind of visual of a character appears again and again, and the original character is named Nova. That's the name that is sort of given to her, and the apes call her by. In one of the earlier of the James Franco reboots, he's an actor who's just in one. That's just the one that comes in mind. Of the reboots, there's a young child, a human named Nova, who gives Caesar hope that maybe humans aren't all bad. Flash forward to this movie. One of the things that's most being discussed in this movie is the idea of the legacy of Caesar and what do people remember about Caesar. And it's very explicitly a religious kind of context where people remember the teachings of Caesar, even if they don't always understand. And so at one point, we meet this character named Raka, who's really kind of like a prophet of Caesar, one of the last members of the Order of Caesar, as he describes it. And he names this human Nova. And what he says to, he's a very kind of like wise old man with a lot of sense of humor in a lot of ways. Kind of reminds me of a Yoda kind of figure, or kind of like, you know, the drunk old man on the mountain kind of idea. And he what he says is, quote, "We will call her Nova. We call them all Nova. It is from Caesar's time. I do not know why." And he says the kind of I do not know why, and kind of a humorous like, I don't know, but that's what we do. That's what Caesar did. And that gets into a lot of the religious stuff we'll talk about, but also it's very clearly that sets up why the one who rides with Charlton Heston is named Nova, because that's what the apes have always done.
Mm-hmm. So in the original movie, Nova is played by Linda Harrison.
Oh, okay.
Raquel Welch was also scantily clad in one of these movies. She's the one on the poster in the Prison Break movie, Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, okay. Yep, that's right. Let's talk a little bit more about the original movies. What role did you see kind of like religion or belief systems playing in those movies?
I don't recall religion being as big as it seems in the new ones, especially among the apes. Like they have, like the humans have a cult, right?
Yep.
Pretty much the cult of the bomb or something along those lines.
Yeah, the bomb that they blow up in the second
Yeah.
movie is protected by these humans.
So I don't know. I don't know what it's trying to say. And I don't know if they knew what they were trying to say. They just had,
Yeah.
again, like this franchise, like it lacked intentionality, in my opinion, as a franchise, as movies. Like, which is not to say that that's wrong. Like movies should be for entertainment first and foremost. But I don't recall it being like hitting you over the head with like any religious imagery. So
I think I would disagree with you there a little bit.
okay.
Just in that, well, first of all, in terms of the intentionality point, I think it's hard for us to think about this, that right now, every movie we watch, we have the ability to instantly go back and watch the sequels, the prequels to it, or whatever else is in that line. Not to mention go on Wikipedia and look all this stuff up. And 20, 30 years ago, we didn't have the internet necessarily. Well, 30, 40 years ago, but we still had VHS. We had Betamax. We had ways to go watch those movies. When you're watching a Planet of the Apes movie, you might have seen it in the theaters once or twice or 5 or 10 times, but then you didn't see it again for another year. And I think that the need to have the details all line up so exactly didn't really make sense, because people wouldn't have the chance to kind of like put them all together quite the same way. And I agree with you that I think a lot of details get changed because of that. And certainly there's different actors. I think Charlton Heston's only in the first, maybe he's in the first two, but certainly there's different directors, different writers. A lot of things don't line up. But I do think that there are some intellectual through lines, and I don't think they ever explicitly call it religion. But one of the ones that I thought was really important was this idea of sacred beliefs, of that there are things that we know to be true. And when we see something that does not fit, we have to, instead of saying this thing should change our view, we say this thing should be destroyed because it challenges our view, and our view can't accept that, which is to me a thing that religion very much does. And not just religion by any means. Philosophical schools do this. We do this in our own lives and our families and stuff like that. We selectively remember things to fit our own narratives. But one of the very big deals is that Charlton Heston has to be killed because it is so essential to their society that ape is better than man, and that ape evolved from that ape is, overcame man. And I think actually there are some evolution debates where some people think the apes came from man and others think that's an insult to ape kind, that we all came from the great founder, the great elder, who, by the way, is very clearly what the modern version of Caesar is modeled on. And maybe that's a good time to transition to this movie, because that's very much what this movie is about the early stages of how this character named Caesar becomes this prophet figure around whom numerous groups are building kind of proto-religions that have very differing ideals, and that we as the audience kind of knew who the real Caesar was, but of course they don't. So I know you haven't seen those movies in a while, but let me just kind of help that transition by asking you, what do you remember about the James Franco movie and the one that came after it that you saw?
Well, yeah, like the character of Caesar is the main character. Like James Franco is the primary actor we think of,
Right.
but the character of Caesar is the through line through the three most recent
first three.
ones, and is not just the main character, but like the protagonist, like the hero, right? Like he is presented as the person who is morally good and is trying to find this balance and trying to keep peace between apes and humans, and the forces around him kind of conspire to make that fail in a bunch of ways, and he is forced to take actions that bring apes and humans into conflict, um, out of his own need to protect his kind, to protect
Right.
apes, and it really like goes against, I guess, what he wants to do, but he feels forced into it, and even through that, like he still tries to have compassion for humans and tries to maintain friendships with some of them, right?
Right.
So I do like where we end up. Like I understand why he is presented as this like messianic figure, right? In the most recent movie, because he did, preach. Like he wasn't preaching, but he had a message of peace
Right.
and togetherness, and yet he was forced to take actions that led to ape ascendancy. So now there are also ape characters who are like, he's the one who made us powerful, like he's the one who defeated humans, type of thing, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I remember when one of the earlier movies came out, with the Andy Serkis he's doing motion capture, but also the voice of Caesar, and I think the fact that he didn't get a Academy Award for it is just criminal, because he's utterly phenomenal.
Yeah, I agree. Like I just want to say, like, Andy Serkis is, one of the most amazing actors of our time.
Agreed.
And if you want to see like him acting as a human, like watch Andor, right? Like amazing performance. But like his performance as Caesar, Gollum slash Smeagol, like, yeah, I think because of the way that those are filmed and created, he hasn't gotten the credit. And I agree 100%. Like
Yeah.
he should have gotten more nominations and more or awards for some of these performances.
It's kind of like if someone's both a voice actor and does 75% of the animation,
Yeah.
because the motion capture software is turning everything he does into looking like an ape, in his case, a chimpanzee, but it's him doing all the motions. It's him with the facial expressions, and so how that plays into all the acting. Anyway, the point that I was going for is that one of the things I think those movies really show is that, and this is something religions and like prophet ideas really try to wrestle with, is that he's by no means consistent through his life. As you said, he's wrestling, and at different points in the different movies, he holds different positions. And one of the things that he really wrestles with is how does he reconcile his personal experience of humans where the James Franco character and his romantic partner, whose name I unfortunately forget, are very kind to him and treat him well, and with whom he has a familial bond. But then when the government orders that he be locked up, he perceives it as them doing it. And then when he starts to see the way the rest of humanity treats apes, often with, horrific scientific experiments and cruelty, he's trying to wrestle with, like, were the people who I knew, were they the exception, or were they the rule, And I wish I could remember this person, and if someone knows, please let me know, because there are great series of YouTubes that were made on it. When I think the third movie came out, a Black creator did a great series on comparing the teachings of Caesar with Malcolm X. And that what he was looking, because one of the things that's happened by then is, even though Caesar is still alive, a lot of people are starting to take the teachings of Caesar and twist them and manipulate them, or just misunderstand them, especially this idea of apes strong together. And, like, does that mean that apes should build communities, or does it should mean that apes should build armies? And he said that, like, if you look at someone like Malcolm X, who, depending on what position you want to take, you can look at stuff he said early in his career, you can look at stuff he said in the middle of his career, or you can look at stuff after he broke with Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam and took on some fairly different positions. And that, the people who hate Malcolm X will almost always ignore all the later stuff. And the people who want to really kind of, like, ignore his radicalism will only look at the later part of his stuff and ignore everything else. And I just thought that was a very interesting thing of looking at. And I think this is something that the movie explores even more so, is not just how someone's teachings live on, but how teachings like this can be very easily manipulated to solve whatever kind of agenda you're trying to put them into.
Yeah, well, that phrase, apes strong together, just that simple phrase, depending on what word you emphasize, right? Like strong, strength, could mean conquest of humans and or like other apes,
Yep.
groups, like subjugation, or it could mean strength in a way of like bonding together
Yeah.
and yeah, like the togetherness, like, is it just your group, like your ape group, or is it all ape groups, right? And then even though it's ape, you could make an argument that you should include humans.
Yeah.
That's the thing, like, to
All
me,
sentient stronger together.
yeah, like, because even in our own modern, like, human society, like, we have a phrase, like, in the United States, like, all men are created equal, um, and that was not applied equally at all. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the United States had slaves, and then you also have like men but not women, right?
Right.
So like these words, depending on how you view other people or other groups, like, can be exclusive or inclusive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really true. I think that's what a lot of this movie explores. Let me go through some of the parts of the movie, and I'll stop and ask questions, but also please stop to, jump in with a theory point, or just a question about it as I go. So we start with kind of words on the screen, kind of like the Star Wars crawl idea, although not going in that direction. And it talks about, like, that humanity ruled the world, and that humanity's hubris led to their downfall. And it ends with, as ape and human struggled to coexist, one ape rose up and sacrificed everything for his kind. His name was Caesar. And part of what
Oh,
that's referring to is at the end of the third movie, the last one, which I think you can kind of see as like the Caesar trilogy, and now this is the beginning of the middle trilogy, or the next trilogy, the Noah trilogy.
and they've said that, right? Like they said
Yeah,
that they want this to be a trilogy,
yeah,
this starting with the newest one.
very much so. And that this is, at the end of that, Caesar sacrifices himself as part of the allowing the apes to escape the last kind of human army and help wipe out this human army that's trying to kill all apes. And so he does become very much a kind of like martyred figure, and I think in some ways a messianic figure,
Hmm.
who doesn't rise from the dead, but his teachings live on.
Yeah, but he
And
also sacrificed his family. Like, not he didn't sacrifice, but he lost his
yep,
son and wife. Is that correct? At
yes,
one point?
yeah, he loses his family, which is again the second time that's now happened to him. But yeah,
Yeah.
his ape family he loses. And so we start with this society 400 years later, or 200, 300 years later. I'm bad at math. And we learn that kind of apes are now living in different clans. And this group calls themselves the Eagle Clan. And they've basically kind of domesticated, well, they haven't fully domesticated eagles, but it's this rite of passage for young boys who are about to become men within the, or, young apes who are about to become adult apes. I think actually of all genders, within their clan to go and find a eagle egg and then raise that eagle from birth as their companion. And they train the eagles to hunt for them and to bring them fish and to respond to music and things like that. And it's interesting that it's now like a society. I think of like rituals often are one of the things that anthropologists often look to as like the beginnings of society and a civilization, is when you start having not just total survival, but like, here's what we, the tribe, do for births and for deaths and for coming of age rituals and for pairings and things like that. And they understand that these things called echoes exist, but most people have never seen one. They are in the forbidden areas, which is very much a quote that gets carried all the way down back to the Charlton Heston movies. And we know that there's rival clans. And in early on in the movie, another one of those clans attacks them. And the thing that really is startling to someone who's seen the earlier movies is when we see that rival clan attack, first of all, they have weapons. They have these kind of electro spears. You think about like tasers on like long rods, which police actually have things like this, stun gun kind of things, but as poking sticks, kind of like used for like large animals and stuff. And the battle cry is for Caesar, which really kind of hits you in the face, is this idea of, oh, someone's taking this in a very different way. And so Noah escapes. I will say here that, again, this isn't a review podcast. I think this movie gives a lot of great reasons to discuss. And I think the second half of the movie is truly fantastic. I think the first half is very slow and some of the battle scenes are not the best. It's one of those, like, it's a much better movie for starting conversations than just like the most entertaining 2.5 hours you're going to have. But it's still a pretty good movie.
Well, they have to do quite a bit of world building, right? Even though it's a
Yeah.
sequel in a franchise, it is several hundred years later, so they have to reestablish what the world looks like in that setting.
It felt like they're trying to do two things. They're trying to do that, but they also felt like, I think there was a sense of that people wanted the action movie of the CGI apes fighting each other. So there's also a lot of very drawn out fight scenes, which look amazing, but I think a lot of folks commented that the pacing, like, it's a fairly drastic change between philosophical exposition about the world to fight scene and back again.
Yeah, because the earlier ones often have a climactic fight scene, but the build up to that is usually like apes and humans facing off but not actually fighting, and there being like an uneasy, like, what are we gonna do?
Right. There's all this tension.
Yeah.
Here's a lot of the fights. So most of Noah's family is killed. Noah's sent off to kind of like try and find what happened and to maybe rescue his mother and sister if he can, or his mother and his family friends if he can. And he comes across Raka. As you may remember, in the original movies, the chimpanzees are often kind of like the leaders. The gorillas are like the muscle, and the chimpanzees are often like the clerics. They're the wise ones. They're the
The
elders who have, they don't give knowledge, but they give wisdom.
the orangutans, right?
The
I think
orangutans,
you
yeah.
said
Well,
chimpanzee the second time.
oh,
And I
sorry, yeah.
also, real quick, like, I'm not an expert at all, but some of these ape characters are listed as bonobo,
Mm,
which is also called pygmy chimpanzee. So I'm not sure like how different bonobo and chimpanzee are supposed to be.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know in the original, they were literally 3 different colors.
Mhm.
And in this one, I think the lines between gorillas and chimpanzees have melded a bit, but definitely this character Raka is very distinctly an orangutan.
Orangutan, yeah.
He has kind of the bone in the bone face and the more orange hair. And he is kind of this wandering priest of, as he says, the order of Caesar. And he finds out about, these people who attack in the name of Caesar and says that they don't know the true Caesar. And as he says, that there were 2 true laws to Caesar, one of which is ape strong together, but
Mhm.
that the corollary of that is ape not kill other ape. And so he's kind of really outraged at what's happening.
Which is not true, right? Caesar killed, what's his name? Koba?
Koba,
It was his lieutenant because Koba had betrayed him.
right.
And
Koba had tried to kill him, and he winds
yeah,
up killing Koba, and he feels a great deal of shame about that. And that's one of those, like, how much does the prophet even live? And I think that's kind of intentional, is that this Raka character has a very sort of deify is the wrong word, but kind of like up on a pedestal,
idealized.
idealized, that's a perfect word for it, idea of Caesar. And we learn a lot about kind of what the apes have come to believe through Raka. First of all, he's just a fabulous character. His voice actor is the actor for Bortus, if anyone knows the Orville, the Mocklin, who goes to this wonderful gender
Yeah.
story with his child. And it's just like the actor has so much empathy while also being able to sound like, the apes don't speak the apes speak a version of English that is kind of not pigeon, but like it often leaves out verbs where we would put in verbs, apes strong together instead of apes
Mhm.
are strong together. And he
Peter
just captures it
Macon.
perfect. Say again?
Sorry, Peter Macon is the
Peter
actor.
Macon, thank you. Phenomenal voice actor. And there's a couple things that I think become really relevant here in terms of like this religion that they're building. One is, do you remember that in the first movie, Caesar lives in the attic of the house, and there's this window that he looks out through that has this kind of interesting design where like it's
Yeah,
a bunch
yeah.
of glass panes, they're in ovals.
It was, yeah, like not quite stained glass, or maybe it was stained glass, but that kind of design, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That metal framework is now worn around the necks of everyone in the Order of Caesar.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and it's painted on the walls of both the Order of Caesar people, but also of these bad apes who we'll learn about, who are like we're attacking for Caesar. So it's become this religious symbol.
Is
And I just
that
think so.
something
Go
sorry,
ahead.
is that something in the movie that they explicitly let you know, or do you have to recognize that as an audience member? I'm curious.
You have to recognize it, but it was
Okay.
shown so I think we see Caesar painting it at one point
Okay.
as he's sort of founding this next ape colony in the third movie. And so it's been very drawn as a very specific, it's a very easy to see and pick up on reference. And they describe it as the sign of Caesar, and it's passed down. Raka gives it to Noah, and Noah later will give it to someone else. And it's also interesting because Raka knows these stories, but Raka doesn't know anything about what actually happened. They come across various parts of like old human civilizations, including this a museum where they have this huge telescope. And in Raka's understanding, this is a place that, as he says it, there used to be vast herds of humans. And in places like this, humans were cared for, fed, even taught. Because there's
Mm.
pictures of humans like at the museum on the walls of this museum. And there's pictures of humans learning on the walls of the museum. And I just love in terms of the idea of how we understand history with a little context we have. He doesn't look at this and go, "Oh, once humans were dominant." He says, "Oh, once there was huge amounts of humans and apes taught them instead of hunting them."
Yeah, that's interesting. So they am I correct that the apes think that all of the relics are ape relics? Like when they come across like the cities that were human cities, they're like, "Oh, this used to be an ape city."
Somewhat. They don't come across those much because again, it's been many hundreds of years, and evolution works really, nature works really fast. So most of the large buildings have fallen down or just covered with forest. Um, there's a couple of scenes where they're going through what is to them, for all intents and purposes, a forest, and they're walking on ground that's covered with grass, and then they're walking on ground that's covered with grass that happens to be a glass pane that someone falls through. So there's not that much evidence left of human civilization, at least not in the areas that they're in.
Hmm.
And that also might be why they're told don't go into these other areas, because those are other areas where you might start to encounter things that challenge the idea that apes have always been in control.
Okay.
So we have this scene. So eventually they come across the character they call Nova, who's a Raquel Welch lookalike, although a very good actress. She was uh the young woman in The Witcher, whose name
Yeah, this is Freya Allen is the
Ray
actress.
Allen. I think the character was named Silly,
Uh,
Cili, or
in The Witcher, it was
yeah,
The Sintra.
Sintra. Thank you. Great actress, and
Or
she
sorry,
portrays
sorry, Sintra was the name of the nation. Her character name was Cyrilla,
Cirilla.
which is
That's what, and I think
confusing.
they call her Siri or something like that. But anyway, when they meet her, she can't talk. We later learn though that she can. She has a name, May. That she is one of these humans who can still speak, who seems to be immune from the virus for whatever reasons. And it's really kind of beautiful because Raka doesn't believe it. Because Raka is, as much as he believes in Caesar, he believes in what's been passed down to him. And that's a world in which the possibility of someone like May existing just doesn't happen. And it's portrayed very funny, in a very funny manner, but it also really hits you hard about just how ridiculous this seems to him. And then we get into the third act of the movie, which I think is really good, and where things shift pretty dramatically, which is where we learn that these raiding parties of gorillas are being sent out by a bonobo gorilla named Proximus Caesar. And
Yeah.
it's very intentional that he calls him that. He has a human he keeps with him named Trevathan, Trevathan is his name, who tells him about the Roman Empire. And he's intentionally called himself Proximus Caesar because that was a name that was used back in Roman times to indicate that they were like Caesar. And he keeps saying, I am the descendant of Caesar. I am the new Caesar, which, by the way, is something that happens all the time, all the way from, people throughout history saying that I'm the second coming of Jesus or the second coming of Muhammad or the Buddha or any of these things, and often using it for purposes that seem wildly different than what people think those prophets or people originally thought. And he's taken this idea of the apes strong together, but he's made it all about power, not community, that he's enslaving others. And there's this beautiful scene at the very beginning of where we learn about his world, where a gong starts chanting and all the apes come together and they start chanting Caesar. And he gets up on this pedestal, and he does this thing of call and response where he says, it's a very good day. And they all say, it's a very good day. It's a good day to be an ape. It's a wonderful day to be an ape. We as apes are blessed. And it's, if you've ever heard the peace of God be with you, the peace also with you. We raise up his name. It is good to give God thanks and praise. Like these prayers that are called collects often in Protestant churches and in Catholic. Some they're more ritualized, some they change every week, but there's always a call and response aspect to it. And I think in other religions, there are things like this where it's people just kind of know the call and response they're supposed to give as a way of bringing the people together into a religious space. That's exactly what this is.
Mm-hmm.
And it gave me chills hearing that and hearing him using it in a very manipulative way to be like, we as apes are powerful. And what we learn is that the humans have created this vault. It's kind of something like out of Fallout, you play those video games, but that there were these vaults in which during the last days of humanity, they gathered all their weapons and their knowledge and a lot of humans together, and they all wound up dying out, but these vaults have been sealed. And what he's trying to do is break into one because he wants to get all these weapons and power. And so sort of our main sort of conflict for the characters is how do they stop them while working together? What's kind of your response just to that idea of an ape who's become this kind of like very intentional religious political leader in the kind of ways that we humans are used to seeing a lot?
I'm fascinated by the naming. Like Caesar is a name that goes back to the original franchise. Like there was a character in the latter movies. But then to name this character Proximus Caesar, like such a direct comparison, to Roman times,
Right.
using the name of Caesar as this like imperial figure, right?
Right. And
Because
for anyone who doesn't know
that's
Latin,
what happened.
Proximus means the closest to. So it's a way of
Yeah.
saying like, I am the most close to Caesar that there's ever been.
And historically, like the character, or not character, but the figure Julius Caesar, he was a general in the Roman army who then basically like tried to become emperor of Rome and was
Yeah.
assassinated for it. And then his not his kids, right? Like Augustus,
Mm-hmm.
his relatives, Augustus Caesar, eventually did become emperor.
Yeah, I believe Augustus is his son-in-law.
Okay.
It's been a while since I saw I, Claudius, which is a phenomenal TV show. But yeah, and then they began to call it like Augustus became Augustus Caesar, and then Tiberius is Tiberius Caesar, and on and on and on. Uh,
Yeah. So
down
like it becomes not just a name but a title, right?
right,
Caesar, which is
and
how this character is using this.
random historical tangent. Caesar becoming a name that then is brought out into the worlds that the Romans conquer, including both what is now Germany and what is a lot of Slavic Eastern Europe. Caesar becomes the word Kaiser
Kaiser. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and also becomes the word Tsar,
Right.
or Kaiser becomes Tsar. So another kind of cool connection there.
And then we get Caesar salads for some reason,
You know,
which
there we
are
go. There we go. The best thing he gave us. And so there's kind of two other interesting conflicts that happen here where we do learn that May is kind of out for her own interests, that what she wants is actually to find um a key, a satellite decryption code, because as we learned, she's come from a settlement far away where they have satellites. And she wants the decryption code so they can use the satellites to try and see if to find other human civilizations that are out there. But what she wants and what the apes want are not always lining up. And in the process, one of the things they also find, and this is very much a reference to the early Charlton Heston movies, are children's books which show children going to the zoo in which apes are, put behind bars and chained up for humans'
Hmm.
enjoyment. And that is kind of one of the last things that pushes back. And after Proximus is defeated, it's kind of a cool, like, it's one of those very Marvel things of you think the villain's been defeated, but no, he's back. And then you think he's defeated, but no, he's back, which I rolled my eyes at a lot. But it sets up this cool scene at the end where Caesar and Noah are fighting one-on-one. Caesar is mostly kicking Noah's ass, but Noah starts chanting the chant they use to summon the eagles. And then the rest of his tribe starts doing the same. The rest of his clan starts doing the same. All the eagles descend and attack Proximus and knock him off.
Oh
And that's a
dear.
really powerful statement about language and music that I'll get into later. But after all that's happened, you have this confrontation between May and Noah, where they basically both ask themselves, like, can humans and apes coexist? And they both admit they don't know. And Noah says that part of him thinks that Proxima was right and that humans will always try to take everything. And Noah kind of May doesn't really have a good answer to that. And at the end, he says, like, but we should try. We should try to coexist. And so he takes off the religious symbol of Caesar and gives it to her and says, this is important. And the last scene that we see is he takes one of his ape friends back to look up through the telescope. She goes and looks up at the satellites, and they're both looking up at the same sky. And so I think it's really set up in a way that, makes me very eager to see the next movie of this question of can humans and apes coexist is going to be a very fraught one.
Do you think the next movie or something in this trilogy is just gonna be Planet of the Apes, the original, like with the astronaut coming back?
I think
Or
that might be the last of the movies. Like,
okay.
I think that it's not going to be a remake of it, but I could see it being maybe this trilogy stays in this time period, but gets us into the social structures where humans have been fully defeated and are fully under ape control. And maybe it might be something where, but like, because right now we're like 300 years after the fall. Those movies take place 2,000 years further in the future.
Hmm.
But I could see it being possible that like one of those movies ends with a time skip or something, or like we have one movie set much further in the future and it ends with them seeing like something's called Icarus coming down to land on their planet or something.
Like a post-credit scene with a crash landing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So this is interesting. This is not where I expected this franchise to go, quite
Mm,
frankly,
how so?
in this direction. I don't know, like the character of Proximus Caesar, um utilizing the original Caesar's message in this
Hmm.
way, I guess is not something I was expecting. I don't know. Tell me what you think that they are trying to do, like as a franchise with this like through line of Caesar, because he very much was not. I mean, he was a character in the original series of movies, but not. I don't think was presented as much as this like this messianic figure, right?
So I love this line from Lord of the Rings, and I don't know if they have this specifically in mind, but I think it's a good description of what they're doing. I think they're trying to show us how reality becomes legend, reality becomes history, and then history becomes legend, and legend becomes myth. And
Hmm.
one of the points that they make in this is that um, Raka is one of the only apes who can still read, and that most of the apes don't know that books exist. They don't understand them at all.
Hmm.
And he shows Noah these books and says that like this very powerful line that's repeated later, the symbols have meaning. And like and we see him later like find a book of ABCs. And so first of all, I think it's meant to show like how important to the evolution of a society and a culture language like actually, how important to a society and culture written language is,
Yes.
and that without it, and even with it, but especially without it, how easy it is for stories that are passed down from one generation to another to become distorted and changed. And that can be good in some ways. The story can evolve and become the story the community needs, but often can be manipulated and changed and things like that. I think though that overall, if I think there's a primary lesson to this, it's about that we have to be ever careful and ever vigilant about the way our societies develop and how natural the pull towards power and authority is,
Hmm.
but also how vital language is. Um, I was talking before about apes becoming more sentient, but I think that's actually not actually correct. I think part of the idea of this always was that apes are actually much smarter than humans give them credit for. We just have no way to communicate with them. And that is only when you break down the barriers of communication that you're able to find peace and able to find connection. And that, so that it makes sense that by the time of the of the original series of movies, if the humans can't speak, of course we don't think of them the same way. I think
Right.
those apes think of humans like we today think of apes. And often like in that regards, people like I think both of us who see apes as like, noble, wonderful creatures that shouldn't be like treated badly, all the way to people who see apes as food sources or things that can be hunted for sport or for, science or whatever it is. And I'm grossly paving over, like brushing over very, very complicated topics there. But my point just being this idea of how do you communicate with language, how can language be used in good and positive ways, all the way down to the fact that the apes have learned a way to communicate with eagles, and it is by doing that communication with the eagles that they're able to kind of win and defeat Proxima, I think is very intentional. And that the potential that if there's any potential, along with the idea of the humans end with being able to communicate with other humans. So I think this idea of language and that how we communicate with each other defines our societies and defines our chances of peace or not, I think is kind of really where they're going. But with a lot of social commentary on just how these things evolve.
Yeah, the two sides of it, like what you said about Raka being one of the only apes who can still read
Mm-hmm.
is very interesting to me because, on the one hand you have Proximus Caesar distorting, the ideals of the original Caesar because, time has passed
Mm-hmm.
and there's no one still alive who even spoke with Caesar, right? So like this distortion over time of a message because it is passed down through a spoken lineage
Right.
means that each generation can change the message and reinterpret it for their own uses, bad in this case. But then, like, on the other hand, like, I was thinking about the idea of books and reading, like, documents,
Mm-hmm.
and we have counterexamples in our history where you have something like the Bible or
Mm-hmm.
the Constitution of the United States that is written, and we can still read it and read the words, and yet those are also interpreted in different ways
Oh yeah.
by modern societies, and we can't know for certain what the original intent was, and people try to say like this was the original intent, but
Mhm.
we don't know that for sure, and people are going to manipulate that for their own, good or bad.
And I would say even when we do, it can be manipulated. And one of my favorite examples of this, to take a very modern one, Bruce Springsteen wrote a song about
Hmm.
how horribly Vietnam veterans were treated and the way in which Reagan and Reagan economics destroyed an important part of America that used to have these very strong patriotic feelings. And to in some extent, he's calling out the irony that they often still do about a country that doesn't treat them well. And it's called Born in the USA. And if
Sure.
you read the lyrics or if you listen to the verse of it, that's very clear. But Ronald Reagan used Born in the USA, playing just the chorus, as his election slogan, in one of his later elections. I think, or Bush did in '88. I don't remember exactly when, but it was certainly something that was played all the time. And to me, that's a perfect example, or like the song by, I don't think it's Kiss, but it's maybe Kiss. It's one of the like '80s makeup bands. We're Not Gonna Take It. Oh, Twisted Sister.
Yeah.
And it's about like authority and government and like being like they want to be able to like put the makeup on and live how they want to live and not be told by the government. Like it's this very, but it's libertarian, but in a very liberal leftist kind of a way. It's now been adopted by Christian right wingers and like we're not going to take it, the government telling us we have to like stop our kids from beating up the gay kids in school kind of a thing. I mean, it's just, we see these examples all the time.
That makes me think the one I think of is Creedence Clearwater Revival's "Fortunate Son,"
Oh yeah.
which was an anti-Vietnam song, but the way it's used in the movie Forrest Gump just
Hmm.
makes it seem like a rah-rah war song, like if
Yeah.
you're not paying attention and listening to the lyrics. And yeah, of course, like yeah, that's interesting how now like music has
Yeah.
also entered into that lexicon of reinterpretation.
Yeah. One of my favorite professors in seminary was the one who was really teaching us how to understand ancient texts in the context in which they were written. And that to look at them without understanding that context, you lose a lot of meaning. And one of his favorite ways to kind of demonstrate this is he showed, studies, but I think it's if you think about it, it makes sense. If you ask people today, what war is the TV show MASH about? They're probably
Mhm,
going to say Korea because it is actually set in the Korean War.
mhm.
But it was coming out in 1972.
Right.
And if you were watching it in the '70s, you would know this show is 100% about Vietnam. They're setting it in Korea so that uh, it's not going to be censored, but it's very clearly meant to be a commentary on Americans going to an Asian country to interfere when they don't have any idea what's going on and all the chaos that causes. And I think about that a lot. And yeah, I think that's kind of what this movie is showing as well, is that like when we tell these stories down through history without understanding their context and meaning, even if it's just 10 years later, so much is lost.
Do you think that this franchise will play off of this idea of written words being reinterpreted,
I
or
think
will
it
that
will.
just fade away?
I think it's going to be a theme that keeps going. I don't think it's the only theme, but I think that some of the apes will be reading.
Mhm,
And I think one of the key issues is going to be apes trying to come to terms, apes who have never known themselves to be anything but these, speaking domesticating animals, fully like, actualized, sentient, whatever words you want to use, like living as they are, that how could humans have ever treated them the way humans used to? And well, I think that it is in many cases a very fair question because we shouldn't treat any animals the way we do. And I say that as a meat eater, but also someone who thinks like the factory farming industries and hunting and things like that can be incredibly exploitative and terrible. It's not always by any definition, but often, especially hunting can be, 8 million different things. But I think it's that, like, and we get a little bit of this in this movie, the humans trying to understand that the humans who treated apes that way, the relationship between the two was incredibly different because they didn't understand, either apes just weren't as intelligent as they are now, or we didn't understand that they were intelligent as they are now. And that's kind of some of the breakdown we get even in this movie. I think that's going to be a further one, is sort of how do you judge people today in the light of their actions of their ancestors and their, great ancestors going back hundreds of years? Because I mean, that's certainly a question that we as humanity wrestle with all the time.
Well, I like what's going on in this movie with the humans,
Mm-hmm.
because in the original, other than Charlton Heston, the humans were basically like non-characters pretty much.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't speak, and they were just treated as pets slash livestock by the
Mm-hmm.
apes. So having more interaction, continuing to have more interaction between humans and apes in this franchise, I think is very good,
Mm-hmm.
because it makes it more relatable, right?
Yeah.
And also makes you question, the classic question of like who is more human in the kind of moral sense, because
Right.
that's what a lot of sci-fi franchises try to posit, is
Mm-hmm.
that the humans are the monsters, and the monsters or the aliens or whoever have more quote unquote humanity in them.
Right. I often think of the end of my favorite Star Trek movie, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, where Kirk at Spock's funeral. Forgive me, spoilers for a movie that's 40 years old.
You make me
Um,
cry now.
well, and what Kirk says is that of all the alien races he has of all the alien beings he has encountered, Spock was the most human.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like if Spock, who, were like able to watch his funeral from the great beyond, or later in the story, if but I won't go into that, Spock would be incredibly insulted by that. He'd be like, "What do you mean? I'm not human." But that's the that's
message for us, the audience.
right. Well, and it's also it's the moral framework that Kirk uses.
Yeah.
That I, as a human, am the highest thing, and so what is closest to me is the best.
Yeah. And I will just say, William Shatner's acting is often panned, but his delivery of that eulogy is just one of the best
Oh yeah.
performances. Like I love when actors do this, just tangent, when
Mm-hmm.
they break, when they're saying something emotional and they have like a stutter in the middle that it
Mm-hmm.
it seems, I don't know, like, can you act that for real? Like, it seems real to me when he
It
has
really
that.
does, especially because, and we're off on tangent land, so I'll just say this, you can respond, and then we'll kind of wheel it back and wrap up the episode. Today, there's still a lot of this part of toxic masculinity, but I think today we're much more comfortable with the idea of men crying at, like, the death of a parent or a best friend or something like that. In this moment in the early 1980s, it was not okay in the slightest. And what he portrays is someone who is so, as you said, so close to breaking, but absolutely cannot. That even though his best friend in the world, the person he's closest to for these last decades, the person who was so important to him has died, that he is a man and he is a person in command authority, and he has to have these people respect him in that role, and he cannot cry. And I can't reproduce it, but basically he almost swallows the word human. That's it. His was the most human. Like he kind of just barely gets the word out because you said
Yeah,
he's trying.
because like it's like if he tries to keep talking, he's just gonna cry.
Yeah.
Is the what I get out of it. Is how I feel the character of Kirk what was
Yeah.
in that moment. And it's very powerful. It's a powerful moment, obviously, like in cinema history,
Yep.
but I just Yeah, it was like one of the best things William Shatner has done as an actor.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right. Well, any other last thoughts on this movie? We'll probably definitely come back to it at various points.
Yeah, I think my question to you is, what the heck is going on with this franchise? Not in terms of like in universe in the movies,
Mhm.
but I want to like take a step back again and marvel at the fact that this thing is still going and
Yeah.
is popular, is making money, so it's going to continue. How did we get to this point? Like this is, you look at the original movies, they're very hokey. They're a
Yeah.
product of their time. The ape masks are frankly not good,
Nope.
right? It's like representations of ape beings, and I think they've been parodied and been mocked. In my opinion, they don't stand the test of time.
Yeah.
In the same way that like of the same era, like 1960s Star Trek alien masks, like some of them are ridiculous.
I think one thing that the special effects are bad, but I also think, and this is relevant, those movies are showing, as silly as it kind of sounds, anthropomorphized ape men.
Yeah.
Like they stand on two legs, they wear
Right.
clothing, they look like ape people.
None of them like do the walk on fours type
Right.
thing,
And
right?
actually, there's a part in this movie where Raka is kind of teasing the human, not teasing, but it comes across very much as that like well-meaning social worker who's incredibly racist without meaning to be. Because he's kind of like, oh, I've always felt bad for you humans. You only use two of your legs to walk.
Nice.
If you fall from a tree, you only have two arms that you can grasp with. We have all four. We have 4 times the amount of success, which the math doesn't actually line up, which I think is kind of brilliant as well. But yeah, we're going to talk about that exact question of where is this franchise going? I have a lot of thoughts and I want to hear yours in the bonus member section.
All right,
Good time
let's
to
do
say, by
that.
the way, 2 quick things. One, we now have a partnership through Amazon. I'm working especially with for books, bookstore.org, which helps you buy things through um, neighborhood bookstores. But sometimes when you want to be able to rent a movie or get a movie or something like that, Amazon's going to be the best choice, especially when it hasn't come to streaming yet. This movie hasn't. So as far as I know, one of the only ways to get it online is to purchase it through Amazon Prime. And if you do, we're going to have a link in the show notes that will be able to allow you to do so and also have a little bit come back to this podcast. Help support us. If you notice, my camera is a much better quality today, which is good, I think. It also means you can see my facial twitch a little bit more, which is unfortunate. I'm working with doctors to kind of try to get rid of. But our audio equipment, we're trying to upgrade all these things. We do it with support from folks like you. So if you're interested in the movie, it would be great if you bought it through that link. Um, and with that, also, please know that the other great way to support us, though, is to become a member. $5 a month, $55 a year. You get access to the bonus content. You get access to full episodes, which we're going to start for this podcast in the fall. And we already have on the Star Wars podcast. And of course, you get to help support us and do all we do. Of course, also, we want all your feedback. We got some great feedback about Star Wars and anime that Riki and I are going to talk about in an upcoming episode where we talk about that anime. So I believe it's Fall of Titan, but I'll double check that. But so keep an eye out for that. Keep an eye out. Let us know what you think of these movies. What you think of the religious commentary or the social commentary or the ideas of language or how nothing about the Eagles makes sense. I'd love to know what you have to think. For those of us who are members, thank you so much. Stick around for the bonus content. For everybody else, we have spoken.